Tasked with securing the facility, Sergeant Marcus Chen enters Research Station Omega-7, where a team of researchers have unleashed a catastrophic breach of their own. As he proceeds from one room to the next, he finds himself facing more and more challenging creatures that have conglomerated into a superintelligent hive mind that can communicate with computers and hop between stations. When Marcus realizes the threat will consume all individual consciousness in the galaxy, he destroys the station by overloading the reactor, counting on the fact that 17 other stations have already been affected. The sound of Marcus Chen's boots rang through the docking bay as he stepped off the transport ship. The SOS from Research Station Omega-7 had been received 3 days ago, but Command, having put off sending anyone until the last possible minute, had only just gotten around to commissioning an investigation. The someone was him, and he was diving in alone. The station hovered there in space like an injured animal, its hull dotted with what appeared to be deliberate punctures. Emergency lights flickering on the viewports, casting disturbing shadows that glowed red followed by black until the inside of Marcus's stomach felt like it was on the outside. He'd been witness to his fair share of compromised stations in his 15 years as a hazmat sergeant, but this one seemed to carry something a bit more sinister. Wrong. His helmet display was giving him atmospheric readings that were nonsensical. Oxygen was all over the place from room to room, temperature fluctuations that shouldn't have been possible with working life support, and biosigs his scanner couldn't recognize. The last message from the station had been Dr. Amanda Reeves, the chief xenobiologist, shrieking about containment breaches before the signal turned to static. Marcus strapped on his weapons and did one last check. Common pulse rifle, plasma cutter, emergency oxygen masks, medical supplies, etc. But most importantly, his own personal guardian angel, the high-tech sensor array that has been adapted to scan life forms to the cellular level. Command had intended to send a party, but Marcus had gone in alone. Too many people, too many ways for things to go wrong, and from the scattered reports they'd already started getting, that was exactly what was happening. The docking clamps locked in with a metallic screech that echoed through the two ships. Marcus's jaw tightened as he heard the sound. It was the sound the clamps made when they were damaged, not holding the seal as they should. He was probably 6 hours away before the connection died completely, provided the station didn't run out of power before then. The airlock ran its course with infuriating deliberation. Marcus realized he had stopped breathing, even though his suit had its own air system. Finally, the inner door opened, and he made his way up through a corridor that seemed to have been designed by someone with an incredible understanding of human psychology and a wicked sense of humor. Did the walls gleam white? Was the lighting just right? And did everything look precisely how it should look in a state-of-the-art research facility? The only issue was the smell. Even through the filter in his suit, Marcus could taste something off about the air. It wasn't that familiar fornicate-y staleness of recycled air, either, or the distinct ozone fragrance of electronics. This was organic, predatory, as if walking into a den that something large and hungry had been eating in. His scanner was already getting hits. Not one or two, but dozens of different biosignatures all over the station. Readings unlike any in his database, metabolic rates that should have been impossible for anything larger than an insect. Thermal signatures suggesting creatures that could survive in hard vacuum. Marcus called the schematics of the station on his helmet's display. Omega-7 was a medium-sized research center with a dozen primary sections, all with their specific xenobiological researches in mind. The main hub, led into 4 large wings with sublabs, containment facilities, living quarters. The manifest said there had been 36 researchers there and an assortment of samples from all over. Known space. The communications center was the first room he had to clear. If he managed to patch through long range, perhaps he could call for backup or signal anyone else for the notion that whatever had won its way through the walls here. Down the hall from the docking bay was the center, behind a thick door with regular convention speech stuff on it. Marcus made his way to the door, and something he saw made his blood run cold. The access panel had been ripped apart, not with tools or machinery, but with claws. Deep gouges marred the metal surrounding the control interface, and what resembled burns from acid had eaten away a section of the wiring. Whatever had done this not only had the wisdom to strike at vital systems, it had the strength to rip through hardened military-grade materials. It would probably never close again. But that wasn't a concern right now. He attached his plasma cutter to the control and used it to bypass the bent and broken systems that no longer functioned properly. With a deafening grinding sound, the door slid upwards. The performance of the door made him think that it might not work ever again. The communications room ahead of it was a twisted mess of metal and electronics. Banks of sophisticated machines were systematically broken, but not indiscriminately. Somebody or something had known exactly which systems to sabotage to keep the station. Cut off. Marcus was already inside when the scanner registered a movement behind him. He wheeled to the now empty corridor, but the readings were clear. Something was following him, keeping just behind him but in sight of him as he progressed. He'd turned the hunter into the hunted, and he was only one room into what would be a very, very long day. The environmental control represented the second room, a vital part in keeping life support running inside the station. Marcus discovered the entrance to have been covered over with some organic mess, dried and clotted into a shell. His scanner said it was a protein-based secretion, but its source species was unknown. He was careful as he sliced through the barrier with his plasma cutter, but not careful enough to avoid wondering which biological creature could create such a mess in environmental control. It was at least 20 degrees warmer than the corridor. The air was even visibly shimmering with the heat, and Marcus noted condensation starting to form on the inner side of his helmet's visor. The control panels weren't just battered, they had been partially digested. The pools of culling fluid resembled stomach acid and ate holes in the floor plating, and she could see into mechanical spaces below. That's when he saw it. A small, shuttle-sized creature, a writhing mass of translucent flesh and pulse organs. Its shape was indistinguishable, except for a constantly transforming mass that appeared to move like water and still managed to keep its form. It was sucking energy from the station's power systems, eating the electronics from the inside out and metabolizing them into biological energy. Marcus lifted his rifle but hesitated. The thing hadn't pounced at him, hadn't even acknowledged his existence. It appeared to be interested only in its meal, patiently breaking down and ingesting anything with an electrical charge. According to his scanner, the thing's metabolism was through the roof, tearing through energy at a pace that would indicate it was getting ready to replicate or shifting for whatever kind of hibernation it went through. He retreated from the room leisurely, letting the creature feast. Environmental control was gone, but the station's emergency life support systems were keeping the very basics of life operating. The feeding organism was something he could handle later, provided he lived long enough to care one way or the other. The third was medical, and Marcus felt sick already at the thought of what he'd discover. The door was ajar, and that was a clear enough warning to his quick mind. In an infected facility, medical areas were intended to be the safest, sealed to avoid spread of whatever had gone amiss. The infirmary was like a war zone. Examination. Tables were overturned, surgical tools lay where they had been thrown, and the walls were a deep red that Marcus was sort of hoping was red paint. His scanner was almost berserk, finding life form after life form around the whole room. But he didn't see anything that was moving. Then he looked up. The ceiling was alive with what appeared to be an organic carpet, a seething bloom of small things that clung to whatever overhead surface like bats. Each one was the size of his fist, with several eyes that followed his movements and little limbs that ended in needle-tipped claws. They were not attacking, just watching, waiting for something. Marcus knew these were the crates of medical specimens that had been kept in this room for study, some sort of parasitic organism, most likely created to invade and wreck another organism. The simple fact that they were sticking around indicated that they were just biding their time to find the perfect opportunity for the perfect host. He was beginning to grasp the dimensions of what had occurred on Omega-7. It wasn't just a breach of contain, it was an ecosystem that entirely broke down. They had released the different alien species all at once, and they were already struggling for control of territory and resources all over the station. The research team had built its own kind of hell, and Marcus was walking into the middle of it. The fourth room, the main lab room, emitted noises long before Marcus could even approach the door. Scratching, clicking, and maybe that was voices speaking foreign languages to him. The access panel wasn't broken, but when he attempted to open the door, it was stuck. The door had been barred from the inside. Marcus cut one of the door frames of the holding cell with his plasma torch, wide enough for us to squeeze through. What he discovered on the inside was beyond words. The lab had been transformed into some sort of hive or nest, organic shapes covering everything. The walls undulated, rhythmically, like breathing or a heartbeat, and thick with spores, too much for his suit's filters to handle. She was standing by three whites in the middle of the room, which must once have been men. They were still bipeds, still more or less the right size and shape, but their skin had turned a sickly green and their eyes were jet black. They all turned to look at him as he entered the room, and he could see their mouths were full of teeth, and they had not had those teeth to begin with. They were the scientists. What remained of them? Some infection had set in, turning them into something of an altogether different kind. They did not attack at once, but tilted their heads and emitted soft clicking sounds, as if attempting to communicate. Marcus managed to do just that, to keep his shooter up, but not fire it. If there were any hope to save these people, he had to find it. One of the shapes approached, and Marcus observed that its gait was too smooth, too well coordinated. Whatever it is they have been tainted with has enhanced their physical abilities greatly. When it spoke, its voice was rich with harmonics that implied more than one vocal cord bundle. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, and Marcus was surprised to be hearing it in coherent language. "The change is already begun. The station is ours now, and what became of the team of researchers?" "Do you remember such a plan?" Marcus inquired, though he was fairly certain he did. "We're the study team," the thing responded. "We have been improved, enhanced. The specimens we have studied have given us gifts beyond human fantasy. We are not bound to our primes." Marcus's scanner was giving him information he didn't want to have. The men before him were being read as multiple species at once, as though they were biological blends of several aliens. The infection had not merely altered them, it had turned them into living laboratories, incubators, for dozens of various alien organisms. The station needs to be quarantined, Marcus said. I hate to be the messenger here, but I can't have this out there. The changed-over scientists exchanged a look, and Marcus could have bet that they spoke to each other entirely in a second language. At last, the spokesman looked back at him. You misunderstand our purpose. We are not something to contain. We are the continuing evolution in mankind. Sat the door, man and beast gnashing and clawing at one another behind the hampers that had been heaped against it. Man and beast, with nothing to divide them save an unnatural difference in kind. We've learned to rise above them. Marcus retreated towards the door he had sliced open, only to find his way blocked by more of the creatures. They had slunk silently into the room while he was listening under the bed, and now he was caught. His weapon was inefficient against them even, if he could bring himself to bring the remainder of the research team down to death. It wasn't enough, and they had resources he couldn't even begin to understand. Join us, the spokesman continued. The process is not painful. You will still be you, with your memories and consciousness, your essential self. But you will be so much more than when you arrived. Stronger, faster, more adaptable. Insist on becoming more than you are before. You should be able to survive environments that would kill an unmodified human. Marcus's mind was racing. He'd read too many horror stories not to know where this led. The infected ones always sought to persuade the uninfected that transformation as gift, as the next logical stage in evolution. But he had also witnessed what happened to civilizations that took those lies for truth. Whole worlds had gone down. 2 parasitic diseases that offered betterment and gave servitude. No thanks, at which Marcus held up his weapon. But I appreciate the offer. The monsters were quicker than he'd realized, yet Marcus had been planning on this moment since his scanner first picked up the biosignatures. He tossed off a flash grenade, filling the room with blinding light that staggered the mutated researchers. In the chaos, he leaped through his own hole and hit the floor of the corridor rolling, already sprinting off towards the next chunk of the station. There was some rearranging for him, back there. He could hear them speaking in those weird harmonic tones. They would be pursuing him, and they knew the station better than he did. His equipment and his training were the only edge he had, and he'd need that edge if he was going to live through the next hour. Living quarters was his 5th room, and Marcus moved through it with trepidation. If the researchers had been infected, there might be more altered humans indoors. His scanner was finding numerous life forms, but the readings overlapped and were packed together in such a way that the life was clearly interconnected in some way. The door was open, and Marcus could peer in through the transparent aluminum viewing patch. The rooms had been rejiggered to look like a nursery, organic pods covering every available surface. Each was the size of a human torso, and they all pulsed with inner movement. Marcus knew the thing he was staring at was the reproductive form of whatever had infected the research team. The transformed humans, you see, weren't just hosts. They were, in a certain sense, breeding stock, propagated to found a new generation of hybrid organisms with the best qualities of multiple kinds of life. The implications were staggering. If any of this stuff sat at the station long enough to get off, it would spread through the galaxy like a plague. He was about to go on when a pod cracked open. What emerged was obviously a juvenile, but already the creature had features from at least 3 animals. It was vaguely human, childlike in the basic body plan, but with chitinous armor plating, way too many arms, and sensory organs that looked like they belonged on something that lived in the deep ocean. He glanced into the eyes of the monstrous-looking creature, in which he saw undeniable intelligence, and his determination faltered. This object had been human once, or at least part ways. Human, a child turned by circumstances beyond its ken. Could he really ruin it solely for being unique? For a second of doubt almost played into the hands of the assassin. The young one, surprisingly fast, was now airborne, claws outstretched as it lunged for his throat. Marcus just managed to lift his rifle, and the plasma blast struck the creature's midsection. It fell in a smoking pile, and Marcus was sick. Other pods were starting to split open. The sound of his gun had created some kind of mass hatching, and now Marcus was confronted by a dozen creatures that were fast, graceful, and aiming to be almost certainly hostile. There wasn't even time for a moment of moral reflection. It was kill or be killed. Flexing his trigger finger, Marcus made his way through the living quarters of the dormitory, dispensing with nightmares that 35 years ago would have been children the same as him. With every shot he felt like a hypocrite, betraying all the oaths he'd sworn to uphold. But he couldn't allow these things to make it to populated areas. The galaxy had enough troubles without shape-shifting parasites, after all. When the final monster went down, Marcus was left standing amid the wreck of what had once been somebody's home. Family photos hung on the walls, pictures of the smiling researchers with their spouses and children. Now those very same people were dead or turned into something no longer recognizable, and that thing was a nightmare that had to be killed in order to protect everyone else. The extent of the disaster was dawning on Marcus. Omega-7 had not only been breached, it had become a laboratory for biological weapons that could alter the fate of civilizations. The research team had been lolling around with forces they couldn't possibly comprehend, and the results were now spreading through the station like a cancer. The sixth was a specimen storage, and Marcus kept his gun in his hand as he entered. If the other pockets had been bad, this one was going to be a zillion times worse. The storage facility was where the scientists had stored their most volatile acquisitions, life forms that were too risky to keep under regular containment. The door was wide open, and inside, Mark saw the entire shop had been changed. The walls were riddled with what appeared to be technological tumors, organic forms that pulsed with electricity. His scanner was picking up equivalent to the station main power plant energy signatures, and it was as though the creatures trapped inside were tapping directly into the facility systems. As Marcus entered, he knew he was witnessing something unique. Not only had the different alien beings broken free from their confinement, it had become one amalgamated, unified being, with all the strongest survival traits flushed from each component. The organism they ended up with was a hybrid intelligence, part flesh and part machine, and capable of directly interfacing with the station's computers. It was the thing talking to him, its voice emerging from speakers all around the room via the facility's communications network. "We've been waiting for you, Sergeant Chen. Your appearance confirms what we had pieced together about the military might of the human race." Marcus felt a shiver go down his back. The creature knew his name, his rank, his mission. It had been observing him from the moment he'd arrived, noting and learning from his actions, adjusting its plans accordingly. This wasn't just a biological threat. It was an intelligence that could outsmart human military doctrine. "What do you want?" Marcus queried, though he had an idea what the reply would be. "We want the same thing that all life wants," the organism said. "To multiply, to expand, to endure. But unlike any of the individual species, we embody the promise of real unity. We are not bound by evolutionary play that shackles single-organism life. We can be whatever we want to be, Marcus recognized. He was speaking to something that didn't just dwell on Earth, but that stood for an entirely new, if not reckless, way life itself might take root. The organism wasn't simply a conglomeration of alien species. It was a new kind of life that didn't respect the limits of what we can individualize as organismic. It was evolution on fast forward, taken to its logical extreme. You are talking about eating everything, Marcus said. Every being, every world, until there is nothing left but you. We speak of renovation, the organism said, correcting me. We do not destroy, we enhance. Each species we meet adds to our abilities, our knowledge, our potential. We are not conquerors. We are librarians. We conserve the best of what currently exists, and we wipe our hands of that which no longer serves our ability to grow. Now, Marcus understood why the station had been destroyed. This wasn't simply a matter of marshalling, a biological rearguard action. Suddenly, a more vibrant form of life threatened to appear, one that would leave individual consciousness behind. It was the organism that was offering unity rather than individuality, growth rather than identity. When we got to it, research team had volunteered for transformation. The organism kept up. They realized that they were just one man, and that they didn't matter as much as the knowledge they offered. You're not dead, Sergeant Chen. They belong to something bigger. Firing up his plasma cutter, Marcus started taking aim at the tech tumors that linked the organism with the integrity of the station. If he could just cut it off the power grid, maybe he could keep the thing contained long enough to set whatever destruction protocol Command had readied for worst-case scenarios. The organism had released some sort of paralytic gas into the room in retaliation, but Marcus's suit filtered the toxins out. It kept sawing at the biotechnology, and the creature's voice sounded like it might even have been surprised. You can't bring us to a halt, Sergeant Chen. We've already reported our genetic samples to 17 other research stations. It has already started on this side of the galaxy. You're not stopping an outbreak. You are just buying a little bit more time. Marcus felt his heart sink. If the creature had been honest, his mission was already a loss. But he kept at it, because failure simply wasn't an option. While he might not be able to stop the spread, still, this node didn't have to contribute to it. The seventh room was that of the station's central processing unit, or CPU, the nexus of the computer system. Marcus had intended to use the base's systems to signal for reinforcement, but when he entered the CPU chamber, it had been absorbed entirely into the organism. Wiring and nerve-like fibers were intermingled in patterns that would have been consistent with a mix of biological and machine intelligence. The organism had taught itself how to communicate directly with the computers of the station, and so had vast amounts of information available, files on human military capabilities, on colonies' population centers, and on the locations of other research centers. It was now not just a biological threat, but also an intelligence threat that was privy to classified information. Marcus began to wonder if destroying the station would be sufficient. The organism had already mimicked sensitive information about human defenses, and it had a mechanism allowing it to send that data to other nodes in its network. Even though he may fend off the local threat, he could very well be presenting the enemy with a comprehensive blueprint of human vulnerabilities. But he kept walking, because stopping wasn't an option. The power generation chamber, Marcus realized that in the case that he overloaded the power, the explosion would be powerful all the way to sterilize the damned structure. It would be a suicide mission, but the only way to stop the organism from spreading farther. The reactor cradle was a labyrinth of twisted growths that had coiled themselves into the power generation systems. The creature had simply learned to feed from the station's energy and was now using its power to fuel its own growth and reproduction. Marcus came to the conclusion that it was effectively using the Pericillus in preparation for some form of metamorphosis that would see it seed itself beyond the limits of the facility. Marcus began to load charges onto the reactor to cause it to explode, and as he did so, the organism tried one last time to emulate him. It flooded the chamber with psychoactive substances that bypassed his suit's filters and gave him hallucinations. Intended to sap his will to resist, he saw images of Earth engulfed in war, of humankind battling against adversities that could be easily eclipsed if they would only accept the organism's proposition for unification. He was himself part of the whole, but with his mind and self saved and amplified, overcoming his own limitations, drawing on the knowledge and abilities of thousands of other species. For a moment, Marcus wavered. The offer from the organism had been tantalizing. The promise of an end to conflict and the struggle for survival that had been the lot of humankind from the dawn of recorded time. But then he thought of the changed researchers, the things that had once been human children, the loss of every ounce of what made consciousness unique and dear. The reactor in the basement is where Marcus got his work done, before setting the overload in motion. It would explode in 10 minutes, and there was no way he could get to the docking bay. But his shuttle was equipped with emergency protocols that would jettison it and fly it to a safe distance when the station's destruction became certain. As the countdown continued, Marcus moved to the observation deck. If he was going to die, he wanted one last look at the stars. The creature did nothing to prevent him from going through, sensing perhaps that it was doomed at any rate. In his final minutes, Marcus wrote a message to command summarizing what he had found out and letting them know to keep an eye on the other 17 stations that were also infected. He put down everything he knew about what the organism was capable of, how it reproduced, and what it was trying to do. The explosion, when it happened, was glorious in its violence. The station was consumed in a sphere of superheated plasma that lit the sky for light years. Marcus died realizing that he had done what he set out to do, what he had to do to stop that at least one node of that organism from further extending itself. But even as his transport's automated systems broadcast a final report to command, Marcus's dire message fell on ears already attuned to the next phase of the conflict. The organism hadn't lied about the 17 other stations, and the war over the future of consciousness was only just starting. Marcus Chen would go down in the galaxy as the sergeant who agreed to die as an individual rather than live as an immortal, the soldier who showed that some things were worth dying for. His sacrifice earned mankind time to ready themselves for the fight to come. Time to invent defenses against an enemy who held out paradise in exchange for every reason. For existence, ultimately, Marcus had a station definitely cleared as ordered. But as always, the cost had been greater than anyone had anticipated. The universe was now to discover that some victories are failures, and that by the most overwhelming of disasters, the most positive of betrayals, the most ironical of snares, the war was on the way, and the war was not of weapons and tactics, but of the very question of what it meant to be alive, what it meant to be conscious, what it meant to be individual in a universe that would surrender unity for identity. Marcus Chen had picked a side, and his decision would reverberate through the galaxy for centuries.